Humans exterminated, Earth destroyed. Yet one woman returned with the truth that shattered the galaxy. The spiral chamber of North Prime was the most secure council site in the galaxy. No outsider had ever breached it, until now. Without warning, a human woman stood at the center of the chamber. She had not arrived by shuttle portal or escort. She was simply there as though she'd always belonged. Alarms blinked silently but failed to activate. Defensive drones locked in place, paralyzed. 12 counselors floated in individual energy chambers. Most stared in disbelief. Counselor Shurik of Talmexar hissed first. "Who permitted this breach? What species is this?" The woman did not bow. She wore desert-worn robes, armor plates woven into the cloth like fossilized memory. Her gray eyes shimmered like ash, suspended in a stormlight. Her voice was low. "My name is Leora Varus, Earthborn." Several delegates recoiled. "Earth is dead," said one of the Vir, its voice layered in tritone discord. "Purged generations ago." Leora nodded slowly. "Then I am its ghost." From beneath her cloak, she pulled a small obsidian device. It unfolded into a rotating lattice of hard light symbols, pulsing with data. Planetary footage shimmered into view: oceans, boiling forests, collapsing cities turned to glass. You called it containment. You called it stabilization. But it went extinct. A silence spread like ice. The first projection, Ithella 3, once a vibrant oceanic world, now barren steam fields. Thermal sequestration approved, blinked the council seal. Next, Yunkar, lush arboreal civilization, now vitrified by orbital fire. More followed. With each name, one of the 12 counselors flinched. "You all signed it," Leora said. "The Apex Treaty allowing removal of species deemed unstable." That word cost billions of lives. Fabricated, muttered Counselor Imsha. A voice recording answered him. His own. "We vote containment. No survivors." Shurak's spines flared. "You seek chaos. Who do you speak for?" Leora met his glare. "For the erased." 12 others stepped forward behind her, each of a different species. Survivors, ghosts, witnesses. "You fear me?" Leora said, turning to face them all, "because I carry the one thing that cannot be negotiated: memory." Her eyes were steady. Her tone didn't rise. She was not here to plead. She was here to reveal. "I will speak for 23 minutes, she said, "and then I will leave. But what I show cannot be unseen." She lifted the projection higher, and in the darkness, truth began to burn. They called themselves the Sand Circle, but the galaxy had no name for them, because officially they didn't exist. The organization formed in the ruins, not in the halls of power, but in cratered forests, melted oceans, and under collapsed cities. Its birth wasn't marked by declarations or flags, but by whispered oaths in dead languages, and handshakes made with blood and memory. The first meeting occurred 112 years ago, during the planetary silence following the fall of Oran Merix, where 17 billion had vanished overnight. They were scholars, former intelligence officers, linguists, and fugitives. Most were descendants of civilizations the Council claimed had collapsed naturally. In truth, they had been erased. Leora Veras was only the latest, but she became the flame. The Sand Circle's core directive: retrieve the erased, restore the record, reveal the architects. Their members hailed from 23 different star systems worlds that had once thrived: Nerva Tel, where the Sky Singers crafted harmonic archives; Rajau, whose people stored memory in crystal lattices; Ketham's Belt, now reduced to asteroid debris with glowing glyphs frozen in vacuum. Each survivor had lost not just family, but lineage, history, and truth. Cooperation was never in question. Revenge could wait. Memory came first. For decades, they operated from abandoned trade posts, hollowed-out moons, and derelict research stations. No signals, no centralized command, only fragments of trust and encrypted pulses transmitted every 7 years. Leora had trained in one such outpost beneath the Martian polar dust, surrounded by vaults containing forbidden fragments. Her teachers wore scars from weapons no longer on any registry. She was not the strongest nor the oldest, but she remembered best. That made her dangerous. Their mission reached its turning point when they found a partial shard of what would later be known as the Apex Accord, a document sealed within the central archive of the dissolved Zalareth Pact. The text was corrupted, but one phrase was readable. Instability threshold, justify preemptive erasure. Full extinction protocols permissible upon unanimous classification under threat clause theta zeta. The words were clinical, cold, but they were death sentences. Over the next 10 years, the Sand Circle decrypted 37 additional fragments, cross-verified with recovered black boxes, planetfall records, and even intercepted private deliberations between counselors. The truth became undeniable. The Apex Accord wasn't just theory, it was operational. It permitted the extinction of entire civilizations based on predicted behavioral divergence, political noncompliance, or even economic inefficiency. Yet the documents had been buried scrubbed from all public archives. Why now? Why expose them after so long? Because only recently had they decrypted the final chain key, an organic encryption built into the nervous system of a dying archivist from Vel d'Arac. Her remains, preserved in cryostasis, had been recovered from a derelict council vessel orbiting a red dwarf, and with that final key, the whole accord unlocked. What had the lost worlds left behind? In some cases, nothing but silence. On Vikiri, the atmosphere was stripped bare. Only a single monument remained, a pillar of obsidian with the word witness carved in 5 languages. On Sanura Vel, bones of children were found clutching memory slates containing lullabies and plea songs. One survivor, a child named Ashran, now grown and part of the Sand Circle, still recited them in the old tongue. His voice never trembled, but his eyes bled every time he sang a genetic side effect of biological weapon exposure during the Purge. Folk legends blossomed in the void. Across fringe colonies, travelers whispered of a circle of dust that kept the stories of the erased alive. Children in the outer fractals drew spirals in the dirt and claimed they'd heard songs from the ashes. The council believed it had killed history, but the dead never stopped whispering. And now, through Leora, they had begun to speak aloud. Long before the galaxy spoke, one language Earth had been its cradle. Not the largest, not the richest, but the first to reach the stars. At its height, Earth governed over 200 colonies, its data streams flowing like blood through the veins of a newborn civilization. But empires do not fall loudly. They rot from within, then vanish like smoke. Earth's collapse was not due to war, but to a slow, orchestrated betrayal, political isolation, economic sanctions. The Council quietly deemed Earth non-compliant after refusing to surrender its cultural autonomy to the archive protocols. Trade routes were redirected. Artificial famines spread. Terraforming rights were revoked. Within 20 years, the homeworld became a graveyard of decisions made elsewhere. Now the Earth is silent. Wind moves across black deserts, carrying powdered glass and rusted circuitry. Where there were once continents, now there are fractures. Cities exist only as jagged silhouettes of melted towers. The sky holds a permanent pallor of gray, tinged faintly red at the horizon. Radiation storms pass every 41 hours. No known satellites remain intact. The last functioning orbital platform burned out over Greenland 67 years ago. Only one human remains. Leora was born beneath the ruins of the old Geneva Council. Her birth certificate was carved into copper and hidden inside a broken drone chassis. No hospitals, no education. She was raised by the last enclave of synthetics, half-malfunctioning caretakers who had reprogrammed themselves to become librarians of a world that no longer asked questions. They showed her the bones of old institutions. They taught her to speak 19 dialects of pre-archive English. They walked with her through ash gardens where ancient stone statues had collapsed under time and solar stress. And they led her to the vault, buried under Mount Rainier, deep in a cryo-sealed chamber. Once part of the Earth Intelligence Directorate rested the Ashai. Not a machine, not a book, a living memory construct. The Ashai was a crystalline neural weave housing encrypted memories of extinct civilizations, including humanity's own classified logs. Unlike digital files, it could not be copied or transmitted. It bonded to a single mind. To access it was to become it. Leora bonded with the eye at age 16. The process nearly killed her. Her temperature dropped to 31 degrees Celsius for 6 days. When she awoke, she remembered things no human had ever witnessed. Council trials from 5 centuries ago. The original drafting of the Apex Accord. The slow deaths of 100 worlds. She remembered their names. The Ashai had survived 3 attempted purges, by Council Black Ops. 1 failed orbital missile strike, 2 infiltration missions. The final one succeeded in reaching the vault, but the operative was found dead beside it, burned from the inside. No autopsy revealed the cause. It was said the eye chose who could hold it. Everyone else saw only smoke. For 83 years the eye had waited. It had not spoken. Until it chose Leora. She did not carry it. She was it. The spiral chamber had always projected an illusion of control. Every voice filtered every movement, calculated every robe a symbol. But on this day, fabric tore silence, cracked, and masks, real and metaphorical, fell like dying stars. 12 counselors stood among the seated elite. They were not supposed to stand. Protocol forbade it unless called upon. And yet, one by one, they rose. The first was Counselor Varys Sael, a long-standing representative of the Archelians. Known for his stoic demeanor and deep green facial folds, he had always voted neutral, rarely speaking. Without a word, he reached up and tore the silver sigil from his robe. Then he removed the thin bioskin layer covering his forehead. Underneath the unmistakable sigil of the sand circle etched with a blade. "I was placed here 67 years ago," he said calmly, "to observe, not to intervene. Until now." Gasps echoed. Some counselors rose in panic. A few activated personal shields. Then the second removed her mask, Ambassador Teji Ran, of the Harellas swarm, her compound eyes blinking in slow sequence. "My people were sterilized under Clause Theta 12. We were told it was a natural collapse in our reproductive cycle." Her voice trembled, not with fear, but the edge of truth long buried. "I was born in exile, raised by one of the last queens. I swore I would not let our history die," in a council footnote. They came forward one after another. A Sarathi priest, a former diplomat from Rajau, a translated consciousness in a synthetic shell once assigned to interpret council rulings. All agents, all forgotten. 12 in total. 12 species erased, maimed, or betrayed. Leora stood silent at the center. She did not speak. She did not need to. One by one, each revealed not just identity, but testimony. Counselor Sale projected a holographic record of a classified planetary decommission order from Cycle 4823. It bore the personal signature of a sitting high arbiter. This document authorized atmospheric collapse on Nervatel. Estimated casualties, 44 million. Purpose: prevent ideological spread. Ambassador Teji Ran uploaded a surviving segment of genetic manipulation protocols targeted at Harellas infants. The file was incomplete, but the encoded council security keys authenticated it beyond dispute. But the most chilling moment came when Agent Corrin, posing as an interpreter for nearly a century, activated a recording stored in their own mind. It was video, a hidden feed time-stamped and verified. A council summit undisclosed to the public where a round table of senior counselors joked about the recycling potential of the planet Mirakes, a world that months later had been struck by 6 consecutive asteroid collisions. "It was not natural," Corrin said. "It was a demonstration." The room erupted. Counselor Shurik's skin flushed bright crimson, his jaw vibrating violently. "You dare bring forgeries and political theater into this hall?" "They are not forgeries," interrupted Counselor Hesheva, normally aligned with Shurik's block. Her voice was tight. "The encryption stamp on the Nerva files matches my own archives. These are real." A line cracked through the council. Some demanded immediate investigation. Others refused to look at the evidence, staring instead at Leora as if she were disease-made flesh. "The Circle has exposed themselves," Counselor Vel Terran of the Zenthar Quadrate growled. "This is sedition, mutiny." "No," Leora said finally, her voice calm. "This is memory reclaiming space." The chamber fell into an argument, no longer one body, now fractured voices overlapping blame and fear. The illusion was gone. The masks lay at their feet, and the council, once untouchable, began to tremble. The spiral chamber was no longer a place of diplomacy. It had become an arena. For 6 hours, the council and the sand circle clashed, not with weapons, but with words, footage, and unbearable truths. The great voices of the galaxy, once so practiced in ceremony, now cracked with fear, doubt, and rage. Counselor Veltaran of Zenthar spoke first, his tone sharp as crystal. The Apex Accord was enacted for stability. It preserved peace for over 300 cycles. Without it, there would have been chaos. Ambassador Taiji ran her antennae, trembling with restrained emotion, replied coldly, "Is it peace when it rests on the bones of billions?" Counselor Hesheva, who until hours ago had stood firmly in the pro-accord block, sat motionless, her hands clasped. Her voice was quieter when she spoke. "We were told the accord was never activated fully." "It was never deactivated," Leora answered. She stood still in the center, arms folded, eyes locked on the central projection. Her presence had become a gravitational force of its own. She did not speak often, but when she did, the chamber listened. Her role was not to argue, but to remind. One by one, fragments of the Apex Accord were displayed. Not just orders or signatures intent. Clause 713, Leora read aloud. Preemptive dissolution of cultures exceeding specified behavioral deviation thresholds. Justification ideological contagion. Counselor Shurik slammed a fist on the dais. That language is contextual. The original translation is different. Then let us listen to the original, Leora said. The air shimmered and the room fell into silence. A projection unfolded, grainy yet clear, a council session from Cycle 41-8. In the center, High Arbiter Halbeck of the time leaned forward, voice calm and recorded by internal surveillance. "If we cannot control them, we remove them. Better to be accused of genocide than let entropy win." The sound clicked off. Several counselors turned pale. "Where was this recorded?" asked Velturine, voice brittle. "Buried inside a subroutine of the Central Archive on Mira Station," said Agent Corin. "Recovered during a sand circle infiltration in Cycle 5071. Authenticated 3 times. Whispers turned into arguments. Delegates began muttering among themselves. The representatives of the Dren system demanded a re-vote on the Accord's legal basis. A silent member of the Yakel Clade fainted. Even Counselor Imsha lowered his head. But then Leora stepped forward and asked a single question, one that froze the room more completely than any recording. She looked up and said softly, "When did survival become more important than memory?" No one answered. Not Shurik, who clenched his jaw so tightly his jawbone trembled. Not Veltarin, who looked away. Not Hesheva, whose eyes shimmered with something close to shame. Because they knew. The Accord had not been created to prevent collapse. It had been created to preserve a narrative, to control which civilizations would be remembered, and who would not. One delegate, an elderly Drex named Rulith, whispered into the silence. "We all knew, but we told ourselves it was already too late to stop." Leora did not nod, did not look angry, only disappointed, because the truth was not unknown. It had been ignored. The air in the chamber grew dense, as if the very atmosphere knew what was coming. A member of the Sand Circle stepped forward. Her gait was slow, deliberate. Her skin was pale silver, with faint lines of biofluorescent veins tracing under the surface, like rivers on a dying map. She stood taller than most, wrapped in a dark mantle made from what looked like scorched silk. "I am Illareth of Merethion," she said. Her voice had a melodic cadence, like distant wind chimes beneath storm clouds. "And I am the only living voice of my world." Silence. Not one counselor spoke. Not one dared. She raised her hand and displayed a small blackened shard. It shimmered faintly with internal heat. Embedded within it were threads of transparent crystal humming, gently with residual data. "This," she said, "is part of the central grove of Myrthion, before it was turned to slag. The planet Myrthion had once been revered as a cultural heartworld, lush covered in golden forests, known for its living archives, trees that recorded history through root signals and crystalline pollen. Its destruction 206 years ago had been blamed on a hyperquake event triggered by unstable tectonics." Illareth stared through the council, her gaze distant. "We were not soldiers," she whispered. "We had no fleets, no weapons. Our greatest offense was memory. That is what they feared." The room darkened as she activated the fragment. A projection unfolded, shaky, grainy, but clear enough. It showed the burning of the grove, giant walls of fire consuming singing trees, voices screaming not in panic, but in harmonic defiance, children clinging to the trunks as the flames rose. "I was 6 years old," Illareth continued, her voice beginning to break. "I survived by being buried beneath the roots of a fallen archivist tree. My caretaker hid me there. Then she sang herself to death so no censor would detect me. Many in the room turned away. Counselor Hesheva's face had lost all color. One of the Veer representatives dimmed its own luminescence to a faint gray. Illerith knelt and placed the shard at the center of the floor. It continued to pulse. For 3 years, I drifted in refugee zones. I told them what happened. They said I was mistaken, that it was a tectonic fault, that no evidence survived. She looked up, eyes glassy with restrained rage. But the council knew. They signed the sterilization order themselves. Her second hand opened slowly. In it, a piece of a signature strip, half disintegrated, half preserved in thermal glass. The name on it read Counselor Vel Turine, Cycle 49 Thurine. The chamber went cold. Vel Turine said nothing. He looked at the shard and then at Illerith, but his lips didn't part. His shoulders sagged slightly as if the weight of that name had snapped something deep within. "Why did I come here?" Illerith asked softly. "Not for vengeance. I had centuries for that." She stood slow and steady. "I came because forgetting would be a second death." And the sand circle was formed by those who refused to die again. A soft tremor moved through the chamber, not of the ground but of understanding. The truth wasn't a hammer, it was a chisel. And Illerith had just carved a scar into history. The spiral chamber had never seen a vote fall apart mid-session. It was designed for unity. Debate was allowed. Dissent was tolerated. Collapse was unthinkable. Until now. Out of the 72 seated delegates, 29 stood to formally reject the Apex Accord's legitimacy. 11 more abstained. The rest remained frozen, unsure whether their silence was complicity or cowardice. It was Counselor Raven Core of the Morellian delegation who moved first. "I can no longer remain," he said, his voice always dry and clipped, now cracked. "I joined this council to serve a vision of peace, but this has become an engine of silence." Morel officially withdraws. He tore his sigil off his chest and placed it on the floor. The quiet clink of metal hitting stone echoed louder than any speech. Within moments, 3 others followed: the Ka Veni Coalition, the Arboric Union, and the Volnith Clade. The Volnith's representative, a jelly-bodied being wrapped in a translator halo, simply said, "We were told we were safe, but if truth is a threat, then we are never safe." The shock wave moved fast, a ripple through bureaucracy. The Murik Consortium, once staunch allies of the High Council, released a public communique during the meeting. It declared full diplomatic and economic independence, stating they would no longer participate in an institution built on selective memory. Then came the flood. Archived files from across the galaxy, long considered myth or conspiracy, were released to the Chamber's central archive. Some came from declassified black boxes, others from shattered intelligence nodes embedded in dying worlds. One file stood out, a direct match to the Ashai, a memory transcript of the Council's founding summit. It had been thought lost, but Leora recognized it instantly. "This is the original Foundation Charter," she said, projecting it to the room. The original document spoke of coexistence, mutual preservation, and democratic knowledge exchange. No mention of control, no suggestion of authorized extinction. Those parts, it seemed, had been inserted 2 centuries later. History was not just altered, Leora said. It was weaponized. Counselor Imshaw's face contorted. He slammed a fist on the console. "This is slander. We preserve peace." "You preserved a version of it," Leora replied, "by burning every chapter that didn't fit." A tremor of anger passed through several delegates. One reached for the data stream relay and tried to terminate the feed. The console rejected his command. "Tamper attempt detected," the system announced. "Data integrity locked." Others began shouting. Confusion turned into panic. Not at war, not at attack, but at the realization that truth was now permanent. There had been no fleet engagement, no bombs dropped, and yet the most powerful government in the galaxy was unraveling before their eyes. The fear was not death, it was exposure. Because wars could be hidden, rewritten, buried under medals and memorials, but memory, once unchained, could burn forever. The chamber, once a battlefield of ideology, now settled into a heavy quiet. It was not over. The deeper truth had yet to surface. And it came not as an accusation, but a confession. Counselor Raven, who had moments ago announced Morel's withdrawal, stood again not with defiance, but with something close to reverence. He motioned to Leora, then turned to the central dais. "I request this next disclosure be heard without interruption," he said. "It concerns the origin of the sand circle." The chamber dimmed. A new projection bloomed into view: genetic lineage maps, ancestral registries, and fragments of ancient bioscans extracted from preserved founder DNA. Leora stepped forward. "Our ancestors," she said, "were not rebels. They were the founders." A sharp breath rippled through the chamber. She paused, letting the words hang. "The first architects of the council, Serentareth Mikodar of Orvin and the others, drafted the original accord. Not the Apex Treaty, but the true accord unity, through dialogue, preservation of diverse memory, mutual sovereignty." She gestured, and the lineage projection zoomed in on encrypted biometric tags passed through generations. 12 members of the Sand Circle present now were direct blood descendants of those long-dead architects. "How is this possible?" asked Councillor Velteran, his voice unsteady. "They were eliminated in the first internal reform." "Not eliminated," Leora said. "Erased, stripped of power by those they trusted." The chamber projection changed again. A new feed, a historical dossier, from Cycle 2089 long hidden. It showed the recorded minutes of the Council's first coup. Leading it was High Delegate Ren Volar. His speech was calm, his words dressed in duty. "The founders dream, but they do not act. Their kindness makes us vulnerable. For the survival of this council, we must adopt stricter doctrines." He signed the document that revoked the founders' authority. Justifications followed: instability, political naivety, existential threats, the rhetoric of necessity. And thus the apex ideology began. They called it a reform, Leora continued. But it was a purge. The council had protected its version of truth through layers of bureaucracy, censorship algorithms, and memory redactions. It survived by controlling the past. The Sand Circle had survived by remembering it. Someone in the rear chamber stood. A young delegate of the Viric Inc. Collective, barely old enough to hold a vote. Her hands trembled. "You could take power now," she said to Leora. "Claim the seat your blood was denied." Leora shook her head slowly. "My purpose is not to rule. It is to restore." "But why?" the delegate asked. "Why not avenge your ancestors?" Leora's answer came without hesitation. "Because vengeance rebuilds nothing. Memory does." Her eyes scanned the fractured chamber. "I have felt the pull of power. I have imagined what I could build if I seized it. But then I remember the grove of Maratheon. I remember Ashran's song. I remember my own mother whispering into the soil that Earth was still worth saving." She let the silence linger. "This council is broken. I do not seek to replace it. I want to make sure no one ever forgets why it broke. The legacy of the founders, long buried beneath centuries of lies, now stood in the open, held not in law, but in blood and resolve." The chamber lights dimmed not by command but by sheer tension. The air felt electrified, like the moment before a storm hits ancient ruins. Delegates leaned forward. Some clenched fists. Others didn't blink. Leora reached for the center console. Her fingers hovered above the interface, then gently tapped in a series of sigils, 12 keystrokes matching the genetic encryption of the HFY. The device pulsed once, then turned a deep violet. For decades, she said, this final fragment remained sealed. Not due to corruption, but because the eye required more than code. Agent Corin stepped beside her. His artificial spine clicked with each movement. The final key, he said, was biometric. From a founder's bloodline and voice print synchronized with an emotional threshold response. Leora nodded. And it needed to be opened, not with anger, but with clarity. The HFY spun open. Light expanded into the chamber like a slow explosion, soft, radiant, silent. Then the projection appeared. A circular chamber much smaller than this one came into view. Stone walls, paper records. No advanced tech. Just 12 individuals seated around a wooden table. They were the founders. Serentareth spoke first in the clip, her tone calm but weighted. "If we are to create a galactic accord, it must be built not on obedience, but understanding." Another leaned forward, younger, sharper. "And if understanding fails," Tareth paused. "Then we wait. No one should ever be silenced to preserve the illusion of peace." Gasps rippled through the chamber. That line contradicted the very foundation of the Apex Treaty. Next, Kalun of Orvan raised a hand in the recording. We must include a failsafe. If any future council begins rewriting memory or weaponizing law, this record must reach the erased. Leora turned toward the delegates. This is the failsafe. Councillor Shurik stood abruptly, eyes wide, breath uneven. No, this cannot be verified. It could be falsified. Councillor Hesheva stared at him. You know it's real. That room still exists beneath the first council vault. Veltarine, previously defiant, collapsed back into his seat. His face turned ashen. We killed them. We buried this for power. And now, we are the ones buried. The chamber shifted. Words no longer mattered. Eyes did. Delegates from the Soren Pact stepped back from their posts. They deactivated their sigils. We were built on fraud, their lead envoy said. We dissolve ourselves effective immediately. Others followed. The Drexian envoy placed their ceremonial staff on the floor and walked out without a word. The collapse was not explosive. It was precise, measured, like dominoes falling in perfect order, not by force, but by weight, the weight of memory. Leora said nothing more. She looked around at what was once the most powerful body in the galaxy, now reduced to silence, not by weapons, not by force, but by truth. A truth that could no longer be denied nor contained. And in the end, it was not death that frightened them. It was light. As the echoes of the Ashai's final revelation faded, Leora remained still in the center of the chamber. The delegates were fractured, many leaning forward, others leaning away. No one spoke. Not yet. Then she reached once more into her cloak and retrieved a slender shard of obsidian glass, a data crystal, unmarked. This, she said, was not found in a vault. It was handed to me by a dying man. The lights dimmed. The crystal activated. A voice emerged. Low, weathered, tired. Iaron de Croce, former chair of the Galactic Council from cycle 4921 to 49.3, declare this testimony under no coercion on the 7th day of solstice interval. My biological signs confirm clarity. Murmurs exploded. Several delegates gasped. Others sat back in disbelief. De Croce had been one of the most respected leaders of the previous era. Official records claimed he had died of a cerebral embolism during sleep in his estate on Ethera Prime. No scandals, no investigation. His legacy was clean. The voice continued. I was told the accord was sacred. I believed it, until I saw the algorithms. He paused, a shaky breath filtering through the playback. Entire public sentiment arcs, manufactured. Civil unrest planted. Entire species voted into non-existence through suggestion loops. We let the machines decide who was remembered, and we told ourselves we still held power. Leora glanced around the room as the recording played. Some delegates could no longer meet each other's gaze. We fed the galaxy a script, repeated through news relays, education nodes, and interspecies policy briefings. If a world questioned the narrative, we redirected, silenced, or disappeared them. The audio glitched slightly, then resumed. I tried to stop it. I was warned. And then I was removed. This message is encoded into the molecular lattice of my estate's foundation stone. They thought it decorative. They never looked closer. The voice ended. Silence. Not a word passed for 20 full seconds. Then the first to speak was not a counselor. It was Rillan Sack, envoy of the Melanthar Refuge Clade. She stood, her voice steady. We have remained quiet for too long. Our archives were seized. Our schools dismantled. We demand restoration of historical sovereignty and reparations for the sterilization program carried out against our second moon colony. Others followed. The Kalari Compact demanded access to restricted education archives. The Yukari Nomad Syndicate asked for the release of language protocols banned under Article 31. By the third speaker, the chamber had become a storm of voices, rising less anger, more clarity. They were not shouting, they were stating. A new presence emerged near Leora, an amphibious creature with bioluminescent tendrils. She raised her hand. I will represent the Reclaimed Voices Assembly, she said. We will draft a list of planetary grievances and bring it before a new tribunal. Counselor Shurik tried to speak his words brittle. This, this is not due process. Leora turned to him, expression neutral. You had your process. You buried truth beneath it. The council, once a pillar of order, had nothing left to stand on. Their legitimacy had collapsed not from revolt or war, but from the sound of their own ghosts whispering back through time. And now the galaxy was finally listening. 2 rotations after the council's collapse, the chamber on North Prime no longer bore the same name. The spiral chamber had been stripped of its banners, sigils, and projection walls. The seats once reserved for elites were dismantled. What remained was a circular floor, bare unadorned stone, and a ring of simple chairs placed equally apart. A temporary convergence assembly had been formed. The one who summoned it was not a counselor nor a general. It was Rillan Sack, the soft-spoken envoy of the Melanthar refuge clade. Her quiet defiance during the upheaval had earned her the respect of both survivors and reformists. I will not lead, she had said during the first session, but I will call the room to order. And the room had listened. 121 delegates arrived representing 76 systems. Many of them had never been offered seats before. Some had only learned the name of the Apex Accord days prior. Others wore the uniforms of past victims. They met to draft the foundational charter of the new Galactic Accord. The principles were unlike anything seen before in interstellar politics. First, no race or species shall be excluded from representation on the basis of technological standing, language origin, or prior record. Second, rotational leadership. No entity may hold executive power beyond one planetary cycle. Third, all legislative meetings shall be recorded, publicized, and embedded into a permanent archive accessible to any sentient being. There were objections. A few remnants from the dissolved council, mainly delegates from wealthier trade systems, voiced concern over decentralized inefficiency. One even suggested the need for a separate class of oversight for less administratively developed species. That speaker was asked to leave. A new era demanded new voices. Worlds like Keshdari, long believed extinct, sent their first delegates. The Surilan tribes, nomadic and often mocked for their non-digital culture, were granted equal voting rights. No translator override, no filtered speech. To ensure integrity, the Assembly approved Heliograph, an open-source AI built by independent engineers from 5 neutral worlds. It monitored transparency, authenticated records, and enforced equal access to all internal documents. No more concealed signatures, no more locked files. The Ash Eye was not used as a weapon, but as a reminder. It was installed in the center of the assembly floor, where its crystal structure shimmered in silence. A symbol, nothing more, but that was enough. Near the conclusion of the 10th session, Leora was called to speak. Leora Veras said, Rillan, the floor recognizes you as architect of this reckoning. We offer you formal leadership of the reconstructed accord. Leora stood. Her posture remained firm, eyes calm. She looked not at the center, but at the delegates who once trembled in fear and now sat upright in resolve. I decline. There was confusion, whispers, a few gasps. You rebuilt the galaxy, someone said. Why not lead it? She smiled faintly. Because memory is not ownership. I did what I was made to do. But power was never the goal. Rillan nodded slowly, tears forming along her lower lid. And so Leora stepped back, not from duty, but from temptation. The room understood. Leadership forged in truth could not be held by one hand. Leora left without ceremony. No convoy followed, no guards, no emissaries. Her ship was a restored TH-7 courier pod, a relic of Earth's second exodus. Small, silver-bodied, lined with scars and dust, it had no AI assistant, only manual controls and a simple inertial stabilizer. It was not built for comfort, only endurance. She chose it because it had no memory of war, just journeys. She flew alone. The descent into Earth's atmosphere took 27 minutes. Sensors cracked. Cabin temperature rose by 3 degrees. Through the cockpit window, the planet's surface revealed itself slowly, like an old wound unwrapped after 2 long continents ghosted by ash oceans reduced to salt plains. The sky a permanent shade of yellow-gray, with erratic crimson lightning cutting across the horizon every few hours. The coordinates locked Northern Hemisphere, former Pacific Range, the remains of old Seattle buried beneath tectonic shifts and glass soil. She touched down in silence. There were no birds, no machines, no wind. The only sound was the distant groan of fractured earth and the occasional whisper of her own breath in the helmet. She stood there for a while, still unblinking. The ruins didn't recognize her, but she remembered them. This was the land of forgetting, and that is why she returned. Among the skeletal remains of twisted metal and stone, Lyra began to rebuild. Not a home, not a fortress, but a monument of memory. She called it the Temple of the Ashai. Built from compressed lunar glass, harvested during her years with the Circle, the structure rose from the ground in a simple dome, 13 meters in diameter, 5 meters high. The entrance faced east, where the sun no longer rose but still threatened to try. Inside, she embedded crystalline archives in the walls, woven with memory thread circuits. Each panel contained timelines, testimonies sound, files, species records, extinction logs, unaltered broadcasts, painful things, unfiltered and unpolished. The raw truth. Access was open. No keys. No permissions. If you made the journey to Earth, you could enter. And some did. A trader from the Outer Belts arrived first, then a student from Orvin. Later, an exiled scientist from the fallen Kalari Compact came to leave her own notes beside Leora's. Each visitor added something: a name, a story, a lost dialect, a plea. They called her a keeper, but Leora never introduced herself that way. She spent her days recording with a hybrid transcription array, half analog, half neural link. She sat on the floor with a worn datapad and recorded slowly, page by page. Her entries were not political manifestos, but memories, the kind only survivors write. Sometimes she wrote in Earth English, other times in Rajan glyphs or Merithion resonance patterns. She wrote for no one, and for everyone. She never broadcasted her location, and yet every season someone new arrived. A child once, then a historian, then a quiet, shaking woman who only stayed 5 minutes but left behind a pendant carved with the word witness. Leora kept it on the eastern wall. Some asked why she chose silence. She would only answer, because truth speaks loudest when no one interrupts it. The broadcast was transmitted across every inhabited system in less than 6 minutes. From orbital citadels to wandering trade fleets, the message opened with a single tone, low harmonic, strangely familiar. Then came the voice of Rillan Sack, now designated first rotating chair of the reconstructed Accord. This is the beginning of the Second Age, not of dominion, but of remembrance. The new galactic charter displayed in full-coded in 43 languages and 7 waveform dialects. Its core elements were plain full transparency of interplanetary legislation, abolition of unilateral military authority, reinstatement of erased cultures into the Unified Memory Archive, non-derogation clause on memory protection. Its simplicity was its strength. For once, clarity wasn't a tool of manipulation, it was survival. The response was tidal. Some planets rejoiced instantly. Keshdari, thought extinct for 2 centuries, blinked back online with a unified pulse signal. We remember. We return. Others hesitated. The Narthian merchant rings questioned how profit could survive in a truth-first order. On Ysel Prime, riots broke out between restorationists and former council loyalists. The concept of a second chance stirred both hope and resistance. Far beyond where council laws had barely reached, quiet systems remained still. Not yet celebrating. Watching. Waiting. As always. In one such system, a relay beacon flickered 3 times, then fell silent. The sand circle knew. And so they gathered one final time, not in secret, not underground, but in the new assembly's central atrium. Leora stood among them. No titles, no ceremony. One by one, the circle's members stepped forward and laid their insignias down the silver-threaded spiral once feared, now respected. Agent Corrin spoke last. We are not needed in this form. Our mission was never to rule, only to reveal. A pause. Then he added with a dry smile, besides, memory doesn't need guardians. It only needs space. The motion to formally dissolve the Sand Circle passed unanimously. There were protests. Some assembly members begged them to remain as advisors, as historians, as something. But the Circle refused. Their archives, including over 94,000 petabytes of declassified intelligence, were transferred to the Public Consciousness Vault, overseen by an independent AI cluster from Neutral Systems. No encryption, no hierarchy, just access. But before they left, a final file appeared. No author listed, no encryption, just a line of text blinking quietly in a pale white font. History always has someone waiting to rewrite it. There was no signature, no origin point, but Leora, watching from a quiet terminal in her temple on Earth, saw it, and she recognized the phrasing. It was from one of the founders, a reminder, not a threat. The Second Age would not be guarded by weapons or doctrine, but by vigilance. And though many celebrated, a few, the older ones, the ones who had lived through silence, knew better. Peace is not permanent. Truth is not fixed. And power, even dressed in light, casts a shadow. The winds on Earth were dry, thin, and quiet. The storms no longer raged like they once did, but a constant haze lingered in the sky, dulling the color of the sun to a muted amber. Dust curled around the edges of the Temple of the Ashai, but never entered it. The dome, with its crystalline walls and silent memory panels, stood unchanged. Leora had not spoken to the galactic stage in nearly 3 years, and yet she was not disconnected. Inside the temple, embedded beneath the floor, hummed a sub-quantum relay node. It tapped into passive data streams, drifting from system to system, never transmitting, only listening. It kept her informed without disturbing the galaxy's natural flow. A silent observer of headlines, cultural shifts, assembly debates, and distant cries for help that didn't yet have names. She read everything, but she never responded. Did she regret refusing the assembly's offer? No. But sometimes when her hand lingered too long on an unfinished journal entry, or when the silence between dust storms became too complete, she wondered what might have been if she'd built instead of revealed. That wondering never turned to longing. It passed like the wind. Quiet and leaving no trace. A few had tried to find her, a bounty hunter once funded by a fallen corporate alliance seeking to retrieve the Ashai. He never made it past the edge of orbit. His ship's systems failed in mid-descent, as if the planet itself had rejected him. A lost priestess of Yun Kar came to kneel before her, but asked for nothing. She wept in silence and left behind a carved root in the shape of an eye. Leora buried it at the foot of the temple where wild moss now grew. Then came the scholar, barely 20 cycles old, thin, sharp-featured, wrapped in a traveler's coat stitched with ancient text. She arrived unannounced on foot, her shuttle left behind at the lunar ridge. She didn't bow. She didn't ask permission. "You're her," she said. Leora looked up from her datapad. "Who am I today?" "The woman who remembered too much," the girl replied. They sat on the steps outside beneath a sky choked with burnt gold. The scholar introduced herself as Melai from Orvan's second moon, daughter of linguists, born after the collapse, raised on a diet of fragments and secondhand truths. She came not to question but to listen, to learn. She carried no weapon, only a satchel of scanned glyphs and a crystalline recorder, old enough to have been illegal under council law. "I want to understand the difference between knowing truth," she asked, "and carrying it." Leora responded after a long pause. "Truth doesn't ask to be carried. It waits until someone is strong enough to lift it without using it as a weapon." They spoke for hours, not of rebellion or power, but of decisions, of silence, of what is remembered and who decides what is not. When Malai left, she left a copy of her own writings behind. Leora didn't read it for a month. When she finally did, she added only one note in the margin: "Not yet finished." On the final day of the solar cycle, Leora recorded one last entry. Her voice was softer than before, older, but steady. "To the one who finds this, you may wonder why I never rewrote what was lost. I could have. But stories are not meant to be rewritten by survivors, only continued by those who still wonder." She paused. "I remember, so you can imagine." The screen dimmed. Outside, the dust fell quietly over the earth, and somewhere in the stars another generation read her words for the first time. The galaxy did not erupt in glory. It did not sing. It breathed. For the first time in centuries, silence was not emptiness, but space to begin again. Across distant systems, children learned names once erased. Old songs returned in unfiltered form. Statues once cast in conquest were melted down to shape new instruments, new bridges, new words. And on Earth, beneath the pale sun, a single figure walked the ruined steps of a forgotten world. Leora Veras, the keeper of truth, was no longer a myth nor a warning. She was a memory with a heartbeat. As the stars turned and others came seeking, not guidance, not power, but understanding, her temple stood open. Not as a monument to the past, but as a reminder that even from ash, something true can still be written. And someone somewhere will always be listening, always remembering, always beginning again.